I get the lack of paying attention and maybe the erosion of ability to concentrate, because I notice that in myself. If I read a really heavy text, like, something by Joseph Campbell, for example, it's hard. It's hard to stay in that zone.
Certainly not as hard as Schopenhauer.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think it's my intellect, because I have the intellectual capacity, but I do think it's my ability to pay attention, which is deteriorated simply because I've filled my life with so much crap.
Well, by that, Jake, can I interrupt and
Yeah.
say, I had a colleague who said, this is probably back 30 years ago. He said, we're in the Sesame Street generation. I said, what do you mean? He said, when kids are growing up and they're watching Sesame Street, they get the letter A, and then on to something else. So they get 5 seconds of something. They don't get anything prolonged. They go right to the next thing. And of course, almost everything works that way in the modern world. Where is that prolonged, sustained kind of concentration? Where do we find ourselves being under that demand? Because everything comes and goes, because with 7 billion people on a planet and everybody, capable of doing anything, you're getting all of this thrown at you all the time. You don't really have time to sit and ponder. So you lose that perspective. Just as I said, I think I've lost the ability to enjoy fast-talking radio comics that I had back when I was young. I have to train myself by getting away from the visual, I think, and just doing that and that alone for a while, because we can retrain our brains to do almost anything. And I think that also enhances what you talked about before, is this kind of withdrawal, where we're pulling into ourselves and away from the personal contact with others, which then has this cascading effect of diminishing compassion, for example. Because if you're not really in close contact, really think about it. I'll give you one more digressive note. I was walking last summer in an outdoor mall, and there was a parent pushing a little child. The parent had a mask on. All the people had masks on, and this baby was maybe just getting into the toddler age. And I thought, this baby is not seeing the multitude of human expressions that baby would see without masks.
Yeah.
So we have, at this time, we're getting the very young growing up. When they go out in public, they don't see this much of anybody's face, right, which is a great deal of what expression is. So this is probably helping to isolate us a little bit more. And and while I'm on it, there was another study done, and the reason I would probably not want people to go to Mars, one of the reasons among many, and that is this. I found that in low gravity, microgravity situations, astronauts were having increasing difficulty, or people tested under those kinds of circumstances were having increasing difficulty reading expressions. So they might read a neutral expression as a mean expression. So I'm picturing people driving dune buggies on the moon under lower gravity, having road rage there because they can't read expressions as well because they've been subjected to microgravity. So we think about the entire gamut of what we've just been through and what we're still going through. We're masking ourselves so we don't see those expressions. It's okay for us adults because we've seen all those expressions. We know how to read eyes, for example, because we've read eyes along with mouths. We've read all those expressions. But babies, toddlers, they have to get used to seeing that because they're not going to understand what is a mean expression, a neutral expression, or happy expression. Yeah. They'll take happiness as neutral and neutral as mean.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, that's a great deal of what I've done with videos on the Zephyr channel and this podcast as well, as I reference Carol Izzard's research from the 80s. and in the early 90s, where he found that human beings from somewhere between 88 and 94% of the time can identify the 10 core emotions that we possess by facial expression. And through that, we not only create interconnectivity, but also communicative understanding, which is important because the evolutionary adaptive purpose of that is to connect in community, because there's an anthropological theory that several of them actually that suggest that the reason that human beings in our present form as Homo sapiens evolved and not some of the other hominids is because we connected through emotional functioning, because we had larger limbic areas in our brain. They speculate this through skull analysis and so forth. While the other hominids were smarter, they had bigger frontal cortices. They died off because they needed the tribe to survive, to weather things like climate change and predator attacks and so forth. So we literally need our tribe to survive. Now, fast forward to today, you don't. You can get these proxy influences in your life through Zoom, online internet, interconnectivity. You can get groceries delivered to your doorstep. Like, we literally don't have to interact with anybody to survive. Now, I would argue that there's more to life's meaning than just the amount of beats that your heart exudes over a period of time, and then we're getting into meaning of life stuff. But I think to go back to the idea of this this world that we're stepping into, I had an epiphany when you were talking. I've been drinking like a fire hose over the last, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years or so, trying to consume as much content as possible from people smarter than I am, which is one of the reasons I'm having this conversation now. Because selflessly, I want to give it out to the world, but selfishly, I just want to learn more. And so something just clicked, and it's the combination of our evolutionary pace as humans, the accelerated pace of today's world. And there's a great TED Talk by a gal named Catherine Bouskill, Bouskill. She's a researcher from Rand Corporation. I don't know if she still works there or not, but the TED Talk's a couple years old. But she's a cultural anthropologist, and she's talking about how the pace of life has outstripped our developmental stage evolutionarily. We're trying to cram more in. And I think this stimulus overload combined with the lack of, I think, formal anchoring in belief system, combined with a pressure to perform, combined with separation for all sorts of things, not to mention pandemic and government lockdowns that purposely separate us, has all basically just resulted in an outstripping of what we're capable of with our still ancient brains, right? It's almost like we've created this technology that we're not able to keep up with. And the question now is, so I've been digesting all this information, right? Yeah, seems like a good idea. There's something deep within me and I think within everybody I talk to, there's something deep within us that says, yeah, this feels off. This doesn't feel right. And I think it just clicked. And what clicked was, we're not supposed to be doing this. We're just not. We're not geared for it. Maybe in a couple hundred years we'll have developed through iterations of generations beyond us to keep up. What's that?
That's Lamarckian. I wouldn't buy into that necessarily. It's species evolved, not individuals. And right. There's certain things you have to ask yourself. It's just along with what you're saying essentially, and that is, have we entered that world in which we have more data than we have wisdom?
Yeah, there we go.
We can get this overload of data, and we don't know what to do with it.
Well, not only don't we know what to do with it, there's a pressure to do something with it rapidly, right?
Right, and we don't have the ability to do something with it rapidly. That generates a good many mistakes. And I think if I had to do something along that line in my own background of studying the climates and the atmospheric composition, and that would be, we've gotten this information thrown at us about the climate, and we have to ask ourselves, are we getting the full picture? Because this is an incredibly complex planet, and then are we really looking at it as I would as a geologist? I know that climates are always changing. I know that maybe it was, in fact, a warming period and an incredible drought in Africa that might have brought us down out of the trees and put us on the plains, and made us bipedal. That's a good thing. And I keep saying, well, okay, so everybody's worried about the climate. Well, so were the people also. Back in 2005, I wrote a blog in which wrote it as a letter. And I talk about how the times are, how terrible the times are. And then I end up saying, and King so-and-so stopping at the end couldn't even find food. And it was like 1513. Okay, so at 1513, we end up with, circumstances, and I end the letter saying, what's next, a plague? And I said that in 2005, and of course, you can go back and read that. I had written it back in 2005. I reposted it, a month ago or so, that letter. And I said in my introduction, reposting, and I said, was I Nostradamus? Was I prescient of some kind? Prescience? Was I this insightful that I knew this was going to come? But actually, I had spoken to students about this a long time ago. Yes, it's a world in which so much is thrown at us. Can we predict the future? Can we say this is going to lead to this? No, we don't know, because we don't know, what tomorrow brings, obviously. Well, and people can try to prognosticate and say, this is where we're headed. But when they use that Lamarckian argument that, we're changing, and therefore our children are going to change, and they're going to change, we don't know where change comes from. Mutations are, they're random.
Is it fair to say that no matter what, we're not equipped to deal with what we've created broadly with regard to technology and all our consumption?
Sure, that's obvious. Because look at Victorian times. There was a book called, it's been about 40 years since I read it. I think it was called Human Dignity and the Great Victorians. And the person goes into circumstances in places like Liverpool and Gloucester and other places that became industrial centers. And they were industrial centers, and people flocked to the cities. There was a rise of urbanization, and they couldn't cope with anything other than just packing people into factories and saying, this is where you're working, and human dignity went way down. I mean, they talk about throwing people into what we would call apartment buildings where there was, in fact, no running water. There was a town well, and people threw sewage out into the street. So they couldn't handle the technology then. We're having difficulty handling it as it's coming now, because it obviously comes rapidly. When I think about my phone having more power than the computers that sent their astronauts to the moon, that's right. Where we are now. And of course, we always have to worry about, are we going to succumb to artificial intelligence taking over roles that we thought human beings should be playing?
Yeah, it's a little spooky, and I think that maybe the exhortation to the people listening and anybody who wants to share this around is we have to figure out some way to put on personal guardrails, I think, right? So we can learn to press in and connect more, because this inner drive, this inner sensation of this just doesn't feel right. I can't quantify it. Has to be satisfied, and it needs to be satisfied for a reason. I think that reason is deeply embedded in who we are as human beings. It's not to be ignored, and it's certainly not to go fill our lives with more distractions. Back to your point about the climate, right? We don't know a lot comparatively across time. Geologic time is we can't even wrap our heads around it. And I'm wondering if these attempts to save the planet, so to speak, are just more of mailbox stuffing. Is it just to try to give us a sense of control because we don't like what's going on?
There's a power play, obviously. And there are those who probably have good intentions. I mean, I'm going to guess that maybe Al Gore had good intentions, but every prediction failed. The New York would be underwater by 2012 or whatever, and all the rest of these predictions. And you see them constantly, and you have to say to yourself, well, wait a minute. before human beings burned the first log,